Welcome to Unintended Consequences, Episode 5 for May 11th, 2026. Starting the week with a case study you'll be thinking about for days. In January 1920, the day after the 18th Amendment banned the manufacture and sale of intoxicating liquor, Chicago police reported that saloons had simply shuttered their front doors. New suppliers began delivering whiskey by the case from hidden stills. Reformers had passed the amendment to shrink crime, cut family violence, and empty jails. Within 3 years, the same city saw weekly shootouts between rival liquor gangs and an estimated 30,000 speakeasies operating openly. The policy that aimed to dry up the nation instead built the largest criminal enterprises the United States had ever known. The 18th Amendment grew out of a century-long temperance movement that viewed alcohol as the root cause of poverty, domestic abuse, and industrial accidents. Organizations such as the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union collected petitions and election data showing that saloon districts produced the highest rates of assault and child neglect. By 1917, more than half the states had already adopted some form of prohibition. This gave national leaders the impression that a constitutional ban would simply extend a proven local success. Leaders like Wayne Wheeler of the Anti-Saloon League argued that removing legal alcohol would free working families from weekly wage losses. It would also reduce the number of men showing up drunk at factory gates. At the time, the United States was entering World War I. Grain conservation plus anti-German sentiment against brewers made the ban appear both patriotic and practical. Supporters therefore saw the amendment not as an experiment in social engineering, but as the logical next step after decades of state-level evidence. Congress passed the Volstead Act in October 1919 to define intoxicating beverages as anything over 0.5% alcohol. It also created federal enforcement machinery. The 18th Amendment itself was ratified on January 16, 1919, and took effect 1 year later. Early reports from dry counties showed sharp drops in public intoxication arrests. In the first 6 months of national prohibition, some cities recorded fewer than half the previous year's drunk and disorderly cases. Prohibition advocates pointed to these numbers as proof the law was working. Skeptics, including several big city police chiefs, warned that enforcement would require far more agents than Congress had funded. They also warned that the Canadian and Caribbean borders would become pipelines for smuggled liquor. The federal government initially assigned only 1,500 agents to patrol the entire country. That number remained roughly constant through the decade. Because legal production and sale ended while demand stayed high, a new market opened for anyone willing to supply alcohol outside the law. In Chicago, Johnny Torrio and his lieutenant, Al Capone, organized breweries and distribution routes that generated roughly $100 million a year by 1927. Similar syndicates formed in New York under Lucky Luciano. Others formed in Detroit along the river from Windsor, Ontario. The sudden concentration of enormous cash flows rewarded violence. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, in which 7 men were machine-gunned in a garage, was only the most publicized episode. It fit a pattern of territorial killings that claimed hundreds of lives. At the same time, the disappearance of regulated distilleries meant much of the available liquor came from industrial alcohol diverted and then cleaned with toxic additives. The federal government continued to require methanol and other poisons in industrial stocks. Estimates from the Treasury Department later placed the number of deaths from poisoned liquor in the thousands each year. Ordinary citizens who had never bought illegal alcohol before now entered speakeasies. This eroded respect for the law itself. police departments found themselves outgunned and underpaid relative to the bribes available. That produced widespread corruption that reached city halls and federal offices. Rural still operators in the Appalachian counties expanded production. The resulting moonshine sometimes reached 150 proof. This increased the rate of alcohol poisoning even among those who avoided industrial contaminants. The policy, therefore, did not merely fail to reduce crime, it shifted criminal activity from scattered saloon brawls to disciplined, armed organizations that controlled entire cities. By 1930, both major parties recognized that enforcement costs and public defiance had become unsustainable. Franklin Roosevelt campaigned in 1932 on a repeal platform. The 21st Amendment was ratified on December 5, 1933. This ended national prohibition after 13 years. States regained the power to regulate alcohol. Most quickly adopted systems of licensed sales and taxation that generated revenue during the Depression. The criminal empires did not disappear overnight. Many simply moved into gambling and labor racketeering. But the specific incentive to control liquor distribution vanished. Public health data collected after repeal showed a rapid decline in deaths from denatured alcohol. Prohibition illustrates how an intervention that removes a legal market without shrinking underlying demand reliably creates a black market. Participants in that market face strong incentives toward violence and product adulteration. Complex social behaviors, such as drinking, are embedded in networks of supply, custom, and enforcement capacity. Altering one node without addressing the others tends to shift harms rather than eliminate them. Modern efforts to restrict other substances or behaviors therefore benefit from asking whether legal channels can be shaped rather than simply closed. When policymakers consider new bans today, the question worth testing is whether the expected reduction in use will exceed the predictable growth of unregulated suppliers and the enforcement burden those suppliers impose. That's unintended consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.